Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cooke Financial Group in the BULLpen webinar series. This month, we're really excited to have Bill McManus from Hartford Funds to join us and discuss brain health. I think this is such an important topic, and so many of our clients are interested in it. I think everyone knows someone who's affected by brain health, whether that's dementia, Alzheimer's, or really just wanting to know how they can improve their own brain health throughout their lifetime. So, a little bit about Bill. He is a vice president and managing director at Hartford Funds. As a financial services expert with more than 20 years of experience, he specializes in helping clients prepare for lifestyle changes. And his research around brain health was particularly interesting to our team. Bill, feel free to introduce yourself a little bit, give us some of your background and why you're really interested in this topic.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks everybody for joining. And as Claire said, my name is Bill McManus. I'm a vice president on our Applied Insights team at Hartford Funds, and basically what we do on my team is we handle all of the, I call it non-investment related resources that we have at our firm. So obviously we're Hartford Funds. Investments is a major part of what we do, but we recognize that there's more to the planning process than just the asset allocation, the stocks, bonds, cash, so on and so forth. So in understanding that, what we've done is we've strategically partnered with really some of the top thought leaders in the financial services industry, and we work with them directing research and developing content. And then my favorite part, having the opportunity to deliver it to audiences just like we have here today. I will highlight our deepest, our longest standing partner, because it really underpins a lot of the work that we do, particularly as it pertains to this topic. So for 2 decades now, we've been working with a program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology called the Age Lab. Now, by virtue of the name, you could probably guess the Age Lab is, yes, studying aging, changing demographics, the impacts of extended life expectancies. If you go back to 1900, which in the grand scheme of history is really not that long ago, life expectancy in the industrialized world was less than 50. We fast forward to today, and the prospects of living into our 80s, 90s, and beyond is, pretty much expected. So at the lab, they call that a longevity bonus. And what they're really working on is how can we successfully prepare for, navigate through this sort of longevity dividend that we've been afforded. And Dr. Joe Coughlin, the founder and director of the Age Lab, he's been talking about this concept of all of us planning for 100 good years, right? So that it's kind of a game changer when we think about the impacts of extended longevity and life expectancies. And what does that do to the planning process in all types of areas? And we have all types of content from the Age Lab around that. But in particular, we become interested in this topic of cognitive health, because, that is so crucially important to quality of life as we age.
Yeah, great. I think that's a great introduction to the topic. And I'll go ahead and kick it off. I mean, I think what's really important is how can someone tell if their brain is older or younger than their actual age? I know you've talked about brain age, and I'd love to hear more about how you determine that and your thoughts on age proofing your brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So forgive me as I pulled up the presentation, but I think it'll help with the visuals. So we were very fortunate to partner with Dr. Mark Milstein, who helped us. He had written a book called The Age Proof Brain. He's a leading researcher in neuroscience, health, and happiness. And he helped us develop this presentation. And in addition to the many reasons we were so excited to work with Dr. Mark, is this research around cognitive health has gotten very hopeful. It's gotten very optimistic in a relatively short time frame, like in the last decade or so. And the bottom line is we see from his quote, we have strong evidence that simple lifestyle interventions can dramatically improve brain health and lower the risk of disease today, tomorrow, and years to come. So the bottom line, Claire, what we're figuring out is we've got a lot more control over our brain health than previously thought. And that speaks to your question about, your age versus your brain age, and sort of how can we get a sense of that? Because what the research has found is they might not align, right? We could have someone who, let's say, is 60 years old, who's, through tests and scans, which are a little difficult to ascertain, but when they do that, their brain might look a little bit more like somebody in their 40s and 50s. And we can also see the other side of that coin. And we've found some interesting research around people that we call super agers. So, Claire, you're familiar with blue zones, right? Areas where kind of
Yeah.
populations, yeah, have these outsized life expectancies. So, similar research has uncovered superagers, and these are people in their 80s and 90s that, again, through tests and scans, their brains look like somebody decades earlier. So, to your question, how do we sort of get started on this, right? Where do we find out what our brain age is? Unfortunately, I wish there was like an algorithm we can plug some factors into and it could tell me, hey, Bill, you're X, but your brain is this. You need to do some work. So we're not quite there yet. However, Dr. Mark put together a series of questions to kind of just get a sense, like a check-in, right? We're not necessarily comparing ourselves one to the other or obsessing, but just a check-in. So how well can you manage your day? Forgetting an appointment, a bill every once in a while, that just happens right in the chaotic world that we live in. I was supposed to do my self-assessment yesterday and I'm late with it. Like that stuff just happens. That's fine. But if it's happening with an increased frequency, that's something we want to keep an eye out for. Remembering important information, and this one's pretty interesting, Claire, because this one we are challenged in the world that we live in due to our reliance, and in some cases over reliance on technology. All right, I don't know about you, but if I have something that's really important to remember, I actually don't take the time to remember it. I put it in here, right? It's in
Yep.
my phone,
Same
it's
with
on my
me.
tablet, right? I can access it, but what we're finding is recall is a little bit of a use it or lose it skill. And because we have this technology, which is great, but we're just not taking the opportunities to flex that muscle as much anymore. Perfect example. I can remember both sets of my grandparents' telephone numbers from when I was like 11 years old, right? But
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you a single number in this phone except for my wife's. That's the only one that I remember. But we just don't do it. So what Dr. Mark recommends is putting ourselves to the test. So do that trivia night. If you have that to-do list, that shopping list, even if it is on the phone, which is fine, just turn it over. Not every time, but every once in a while. Flex that muscle that's going to help, keep our brains young. Moving and maintaining balance. Research has found that optimal posture and balance can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 45%. I always sit up a little taller when I remind myself of that fact. But we want to put ourselves to the test here as well, right? Anybody who has little kids or grandkids, they're running around on playgrounds and jungle gyms. My 10-year-old niece doesn't walk, she skips or does cartwheels wherever she's going. That would be kind of odd to do, as adults. But we do have to take the opportunities to work on balance. Yoga, dancing, golf, Pilates, whatever it is. If you're working on your balance, not only are you doing good things for your physical health, but for your brain health. Walking is very important. We're going to come back to this, but walking just 30 minutes a day can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 65%. And that's
Wow.
not even cumulatively, just, or that is cumulatively, not even at one time. So we want to be making sure we're walking on a daily basis. And then I love the last one, how old do I feel? So research has found people that have a positive outlook on the aging process can actually reduce the risk of dementia by up to 49%. So, again, not a test, not comparing one to other, just kind of check in on things every once in a while. But this can kind of give us a sense of what our brain age is.
Great. Yeah. I didn't know a lot of those facts. So it's really interesting just to hear how some of those small daily changes can really affect your risk of dementia and improve your brain health. So thanks for that
Absolutely,
info.
and to that point, and we're gonna take a little bit of a deeper dive and give some tips and tricks. But here's where the optimism comes in, sort of as you were saying, is that we have this control, right? For years and years, if we've ever dealt through a challenging situation with cognitive decline, as I did in my family, we would tend to use default statements like what we see, right? This just happens. It's a normal part of aging. We can't do anything about it. It's genetic, so on and so forth. The key statistic here. 95 to 99% of instances of Alzheimer's and dementia are not strictly genetic. Let me be perfectly clear. Genes can absolutely play a role. They can raise or lower risk, but they're not determinate. So that's what Dr. Mark in his quote was saying, and we were just alluding to. We've got a lot more control than previously thought, and that's obviously tremendous news.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And earlier, when we were discussing before this call, you mentioned brain trash. Can you tell us a little about what brain trash is and how can we prevent it from building up?
So what's going on up there, right? So our brains are about 3 pounds. Our brains do start to shrink, starting at age 40, about 5% every 10 years or so. That's just how it happens. But we see here on the screen, our 3 pound brain makes 5 pounds of brain trash per year. Now that kind of sounds extreme, but this brain trash, it's broken down proteins, leftover chemical reactions. It just happens. It's just a normal part of being alive. We can't necessarily stop our brains from producing the trash. However, the more trash that's built up, the older the brain. So almost think of it like a busy downtown metro area, right? If there's trash that just piles up on the sidewalk and nobody comes and cleans it out, eventually it's going to be impossible to navigate and get around. Same concept here. If we're not doing things to keep our brains clean, and we're going to get into how that happens here in a little bit, but if we're not doing things to keep our brains clean, that's where that trash builds up. And we see an example of it here, specific brain trash to Alzheimer's disease, plaques and tangles. We see on the left-hand side, three normally functioning brain cells working in a proper fashion, communicating in an effective manner. But on the right-hand side, those plaques develop in between the cells, the tangles within. And this is where we start to see a disruption in communication. And this is where we see the symptoms that we recognize as dementia. So again, we want to be keeping our brains clean, because a clean brain is a healthy brain. And we're going to talk about how that happens in a minute here. I do, before we get to that, because I think that's going to be the next thing we're going to talk about. I do just want to highlight a couple planning considerations for folks, and some things to consider. This one in particular, the average Alzheimer's patient survive 4 to 8 years, but some can live as long as 20. Again, just personal experience, and unfortunately, one of my grandmothers had severe Alzheimer's, and this was years ago. But I remember my parents and my family planning based off of what the doctors were telling us then. Plan for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and she ended up living 13. So you just don't know. And Claire, we almost have like a paradox where we have all these medical advances, more like awareness. We can keep our bodies healthy longer in a lot of instances. If we are managing cognitive decline, it could just exacerbate the situation. The cost of care is certainly not going down. Where now we're over $100,000 for skilled nursing home. Adding on top of that, if there's memory care needs, and these are just national averages, so they can vary pretty widely. Also, social medicine not covering long-term nursing home stays, and overall, can be pretty significant from a financial outlay. And then just all the other things that go into caregiving, whether it's, home things we don't think of right away, about home modifications, lost income. I saw a statistic from the MIT Age Lab, just out-of-pocket costs for a family caregiver. So not a hired caregiver, just somebody to take care of a family member. Over $7,000 a year out-of-pocket cost. And if you're caring for somebody with Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's, that number doubles, right? So again, planning considerations, but what this all really comes down to, alluding back to our opening statements, right? Quality of life as we age, all the things that we want to do, travel, time with family, still working, whatever it may be. All of it is so dependent on the quality of our cognitive health. So it's such a great message that we're excited to share, that, again, we have this control over that brain health.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And talking about the health costs, I mean, we're talking to clients about this on a daily basis. And a lot of times when we're building out a financial plan, some of our clients say, well, I won't be spending as much when I'm older and I'm retired. And we like to remind them that, you are spending the same amount of money, you're just spending it on different things, right? A lot of those costs that you might be spending on travel and different activities now might be spent on healthcare in the future. So I think that was great to mention there. And it's really something that you need to focus on when you're planning for your retirement and for your longevity. Shifting back to, how to age-proof your brain, if you could pick one tip to protect your brain, where would you start? What would be your first go-to tip?
So we're gonna target 5 different lifestyle sort of interventions, as Dr. Mark was alluding to in his opening quote. And these things are all important, and there is a cumulative impact of either starting to or continuing to incorporate or do the things that we're about to discuss. But this first one that we are going to mention, we do single this out as our greatest ally in our fight to retain our brain, and that is sleep. So sleep is crucially important. Recommendation 7 to 9 hours a night. There are some folks that do perfectly fine on less than that. Actually, they're called short sleepers. So I'm sure we've got a few short sleepers in the audience. But for a vast majority of us, that 7 to 9 hours is going to be that sweet spot. We sleep in these 90-minute repeating cycles, and there's physical changes that happen to our brains while we sleep. So we talked about the brain trash earlier. So how do we keep our brains clean? How do we take out the trash? It actually happens while you sleep. So tonight and every night, multiple times a night, your brain actually shrinks down to about 60% of its normal size and gives itself what's called a brain squeeze. Sounds like something from a horror movie, I know, a sci-fi movie, but you give yourself a brain squeeze, it creates space between your brain and your skull, fluid then rushes up from your spine and gives your brain what is technically called a brain wash. It's called the glymphatic system. Again, it happens every night, multiple times a night. Brain squeeze creates that space, that fluid comes up, it washes out that brain trash, and then it gets into your bloodstream, kidneys, and so on and so forth. But this is why sleep is so important, because sleep is the mechanism that we use to keep our brains clean. So a couple recommendations. How can we ensure that we're getting proper sleep and make sure we're taking out the trash, so to speak? The first one, it's the second one on the list, but the first one we talk about is sleeping in true darkness. So ask yourself, tonight when you're going to sleep, am I sleeping in true darkness or am I sleeping in what we call modern darkness? Because what we found, light pollution, and this even when our eyes are closed, and this can come from certainly light outside, a cell phone, an alarm clock charging on a nightstand. If you have a TV in your room, like that little red light on the TV, or if you have a thermostat, that can actually impact your blood pressure, insulin response, pulse rate, things that might inhibit your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. So anything you can do to make it darker, blackout shades, eye masks. We've been working with Dr. Mark for a few years now, but anecdotal, but my wife and I have been wearing eye masks, and it's I think it's made a tremendous difference in the quality of sleep that I've gotten. So I found that to be helpful. I travel quite a bit. I mentioned that I'm in a hotel in Milwaukee right now. So I do have a travel tip. I'm sure a lot of the folks on the line travel. The hotel shades, they're usually pretty good quality, right? They do a good job blocking it out, but they never close all the way. There's like that little sliver where the light comes in. Take the hanger in the closet that has the clips, to hang like pants or whatever, and turn it sideways and clip the blinds together. They'll stay closed all night. You'll get the best night of sleep when you're traveling. So there's your travel tip. But the key is basically the darker the better. On the flip side of that is we want to get natural light early. So there's Nobel Prize winning research around, our sleep clock. And basically when you break it down, you are getting ready for bed when you wake up in the morning. So we have to let our bodies know it's time to be awake. So if we can get 10 to 15 minutes exposure to natural light within 30 minutes of waking up. Doesn't have to be outside. We know what the thermostat's starting to look like. Outside is great. There's a lot of benefits to being outside, but we just want to get exposure to sunlight, because that's going to let our bodies know it's time to be awake. And that's going to help set us up for sleep that evening. And then lastly, chilling out for better sleep. If anyone's ever been in a warm room as you're trying to go to sleep and you're kind of tossing and turning, that's your brain and your body desperately trying to lower its core temperature. Our core temp drops a degree or two as we sleep. So there's no magic number. It's all going to be relative. But if we turn that dial down a little bit or have that window cracked if it's nice out, much more likely to fall asleep and stay asleep. So I'll pause there. I don't know if you have any questions, Claire, or if anyone in the audience, feel free to use the chat and we'll certainly address them at the end. But I usually get a couple questions on sleep. I have some that I'll address, but I'll just pause and see if anybody has any.
Yeah, I think these are great tips. And living in such a digital era, I think it's hard to not have your phone right next to your bed or to not have a TV in your room. So I think it's really interesting that you pointed out even those small bits of light can really be affecting your sleep. If I'm waking up in the middle of the night frequently, does that affect my brain health? What's the impact there if you're someone who wakes up maybe around 3 or 4 a.m. or you wake up multiple times during the night?
Yeah. And then I do want to come back to your screen thing that you were talking about there, because that's another one. But yes,
Yeah.
so waking up in the middle of the night, because I don't want anybody to hang up from the call and be like, oh my gosh, I wake up all the time in the middle of the night. I'm not getting the brainwash. I'm done. Don't worry. It actually turns out we wake up in the middle of the night way more often than we recognize, right? We're not necessarily physically getting up, but as we're going through these stages of sleep, we're sort of waking up and going back to sleep. So most likely, if you're getting up in the middle of the night, it's typically happening during a lighter state of sleep. So you're not necessarily interrupting that brain wash. So don't worry too much about that. What we want to do is recognize it's perfectly normal to get up if we're waking up in the middle of the night. That's fine. We want to relax. We're going to talk about breathing in a little bit. We want to try to relax and get back to sleep. The hardest thing, and Dr. Mark recommends this, is resisting the urge if we wake up in the night to reach over to that cell phone or that alarm clock and see what time it is. Right? It's almost impossible to do, right? Because we want to know.
Right.
The key is, trying to get as much quality sleep as we can, but don't fret too much if we're getting up in the middle of the night, so on and so on and so forth. We just want to try to relax, try to get that sleep as much as we can.
Perfect. And then here's a question from the chat. Are there any natural sleep aid supplements or prescriptions that are better than others or helpful to your sleep?
So we'll start with I see on the RX, like the
Yeah.
sleep aids. Um, Dr. Mark is just a little cautious on supplements, right? Sometimes the marketing can get a little ahead of the science, not as highly regulated, as FDA medication, could interfere with other medication that we're taking, right, that we might not know. So want to be cautious. Also, taking supplements can also interfere with our body's ability to make like melatonin, for example. Taking melatonin to sleep, that could actually interfere. Our body makes melatonin to help us fall asleep. So we want to be somewhat cautious with those, natural, things that we can do. I've heard Dr. Mark talk about being more of a proponent of trying to put down things that are stimulating, like screens, right before we go to bed. So I think you were alluding to that. It's hard not to do that, but the light from a screen can mimic natural light, so that could trick our brains into thinking it's not time to go to sleep, it's time to be awake. So that could be causing challenges for trying to fall asleep. Also, we kind of get into the scrolling, where the brain starts going. So we want to try to do things naturally. And I think, thinking about the light in the room, we're going to talk about diet and exercise and all other things that tie in to getting good quality sleep. So little cautious on supplements, I'd say, is typically what I hear from Dr. Mark.
Okay, great. And another question from the chat. This is probably a little more related to the phones, but is there a favorite brain game or app that you have that's beneficial for brain health?
Yep. So we're going to come back to this at
Okay.
the end, but yeah, I mean, there are definitely things we can leverage technology in a lot of ways to help with brain health. So we'll come back to that one.
Okay, and then one more about sleep that we've got in the chat here. What about going to sleep listening to something to take your mind off of daily issues? So maybe falling asleep to a story or a podcast.
So listening to things are fine. Actually, I'll even take a step back, because some people say, like, I like having the TV on when I go to sleep. I like falling asleep with TV. That is actually fine, but you want to set a timer on the TV because you don't want the light flashing after you have gone to sleep. So if falling asleep to the TV helps you, fine, right? Just set a timer, make sure it goes off. Listening, as long as it's not something that's jarring, don't listen to like a story that's like a horror story
Murder
that makes
mystery
you.
podcast,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. As long as it's not, or loud noises, but like, there's all kinds of different research on white noise, brown noise, green noise, and a lot of that research is new. If listening to something, a story, classical music, white noise, if that helps you fall asleep, that is totally fine, right? That's not going to interfere with the brainwash. So if that helps you, that's good.
Okay, great. And we got a question about gummies. I think that relates a little bit to the, supplement question that we talked about. Those gummies are typically magnesium or melatonin. So I know you touched on that, but anything else there you want to add before we move on?
Yeah, I think, there's always going to be kind of new things that come out that are going to be helpful, and just remembering, the research is new on a lot of things, especially for like long-term impact. So again, want to try to do things as naturally as possible is usually the prescription that I hear from Dr. Mark.
Okay, great. All right. Well, with that, what are maybe some activities or habits that best strengthen the brain?
Sure. So a couple things we can talk about here. So we can talk about diet. So diet is really important because there's a gut-brain connection, and the main thing we want to do is reduce inflammation, because inflammation in our gut can spread to other areas of our body. But if it does so to our brain, it could actually impact the specific cell in our brain called microglia, which is basically like the immune system for our brain. However, if it becomes overinflamed, these cells will start attacking healthy brain cells, not carrying out their intended purpose. So obviously, we don't want that to happen. So anything that we can do, recommendation is kind of like a Mediterranean type diet, or like a mind. Some people call it the mind diet. Fish, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, beans, very anti-inflammatory. Fruits and vegetables. You want to eat things that are going to spoil, eventually. I'm not sure if anyone here, Claire, you've been to the Museum of Science and Technology in Chicago. So
Yeah.
they don't have it anymore, but they had on display an unwrapped Twinkie, and it was unwrapped for like a dozen years, and it looked delicious. It looks like it literally just came out of the packaging. That's probably not something we want to eat on a regular basis, right? If the ingredient list reads like a chemistry experiment. So, pretty good rule of thumb. We're not going to be perfect. Trying to eat whole natural foods 75% of the time. You're doing good things for your gut health and thus your brain health. So, that's one thing that we can do to make sure we're keeping our brains healthy. The second one or the third one is pretty interesting. The stress surprise, because we're told constantly that stress is bad and we don't want to be overly stressed. And that's true. We don't want to be overly stressed, but it actually turns out a little bit of stress is not only good, but essential for brain health. When we're stressed, cortisol is released, actually known to grow brain cells, specifically in the memory part of the brain. So stress is actually fine. So, a little bit of traffic, little bit of volatility in the market, Claire, right? It's okay. We know it's going to go up. It's stressful, but that's actually a little bit good for us. But we do want to manage it, right? We don't want to be overly stressed. So there's different things we can do, changing perspective. I like this rose thorn bud exercise. It's just a reflective exercise, just taking some time at the end of the day. What went well, what didn't go that well, what am I looking forward to tomorrow? Just that little pause. Breathing exercises. So the mainstream science, the benefits around breathing exercises, meditation, mindfulness, quiet time, whatever works for you. Research has found people who hadn't before and start incorporating some type of, I'll just say mindfulness is like an all-encompassing term, just in an 8-week period actually showed physical changes to their brains. Growth of the prefrontal cortex, where logic is applied, reduction of the amygdala, which is the fear center of our brain. So breathing exercises, the way that I think about that is we just got to give ourselves a break, right? We're go, go, go from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to sleep, work, family, whatever it may be. We just have to take a little bit of time, a little bit of pause. Research, even just closing your eyes for a minute, a couple times a day can actually do good things. So we want to embrace that little bit of stress. There's no way we're going to get rid of it all, but we want to embrace it, but manage it. So that's another area. And then this one we'll talk about and then we'll come back to the brain games and our last tip. But getting moving. We mentioned before, walking 30 minutes a day can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 65%. You want to elevate the heart rate a little bit. Cardiovascular health is directly tied to brain health. Anything that works for you from a habit formation standpoint. So, visual cues can be helpful. Park a little further away from the office, from the store. I think we can leverage technology here. If we have, fitness trackers or reminders to stand, walk, whatever it may be. Do something you like doing, right? We don't want to make it a chore, much more harder to keep that habit. And then certainly having somebody to do exercise or activities with makes it much more enjoyable. But the key here, we just want to be getting some motion in on a daily basis.
Yeah,
So we'll
that's
come
great.
to our last one here. And I think we can address that one question. I think you had a question around this too, Claire.
Yep. Yeah, I
So
think. Oh, sorry. I was just going to repeat the question from the chat, but is there a favorite brain game that's available as a phone app? I know a lot of those are advertised as great for your brain health, so we can address that one.
So here's the key. They're fine, right? Anything that's stimulating us, anything that's keeping us challenged is great. But the key here is we want to learn new things. And I emphasize that because people do say, hey, I do brain games on my phone or crossword puzzles or Sudoku, which again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you think about it, if you're consistently doing brain games, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, basically you're just getting really, really good at brain games, crossword and Sudoku. You're building on a skill. You're not necessarily learning something new. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing any of that. However, we also want to incorporate learning new things, which could be a new brain game, whatever it may be, because when we learn something new, two things happen. Norepinephrine is a chemical. It actually squirts in our brain. It's been described as a power wash for your brain. So that helps break up the brain trash so you have a more effective brain wash. So that happens when you learn something new. And then myelin, which is the coating around our brain, actually builds up. So that helps speed up cell to cell communication and processing. So we want to be learning new things. So, podcast, documentary, book on a, subject that's new. Two things that have proven to be very effective is learning a new language or learning to play an instrument. The frustration that comes along with that actually kind of supercharges those physical responses. We can learn new physical activities, and that's sort of checking off a couple of the boxes that we talked about. Pickleball, dancing, right? Whatever it may be. If you're learning a sport and doing activity, you're sort of double dipping, which is good. I know we're close on time. I'm gonna spend just a minute on the last bullet point because it's really, really important.
Yeah, go for
Socialize
it.
with socialize with friends and meet new people. So obviously, in the context of our conversation, when you meet new people, you're learning new things. They're turning you on to different, new subjects. It's a great way to sort of check this box as well. But I just think, again, we've been working with the MIT H Lab 20 years, and almost every um, challenge or opportunity that's associated with successfully navigating longevity, the solution almost invariably comes down to the quality of our social network. It's what keeps us engaged, active, motivated, forms the basis of our support system. The Age Lab uses the word intentionality around our social network. Are we intentional about the social network and what that looks like? Harvard has done this study on happiness. It's a longitudinal study, the longest of its kind. They've been doing it for 85 years. And what they found was the number one determinant of happiness and thus health, not success or wealth or anything like that, the quality of the relationships that you have. So I think that ties into a lot of what we talked about today. I will make one more note, and I just encourage everybody, and this comes from Dr. Mark, and it ties into the socialization. All of us, all the people that we know, we want to recommend having our hearing checked. And the
Mhm.
reason I say that is, and addressing it if there's an issue, people that have mild, untreated hearing loss increase their risk of dementia by 2 times. And if it's more severe, that goes up to 5 times. Just the pullback, lack of engagement, lack of learning that could be associated with it. So we just encourage everybody and have everybody encourage those that they love, have our hearing checked. And if there's an issue, we want to address it because that could be a real challenge. But the key is learning something new. I hope everybody learned something new today. So we're doing a lot of good things for brain health.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think these are great tips, and some of them you might not think of as ways to improve your brain health, but I think it all makes sense, and we appreciate you taking the time to educate us here today. I've got two more quick questions for you if you've got time.
Do
Um, One, I like to enjoy a good glass of wine here or there. How does alcohol affect my brain health?
so. Dr. Mark actually says, there's kind of supporting back to the diet section of what we talked. A glass of wine can actually be okay, right? For heart health, some people say, this first thing, but basically everything in moderation, right? If alcohol is impacting, sleep or other areas, that's certainly going to be, be detrimental. But from what, all the research I've heard from Dr. Mark, in moderation, we're not, doing terrible things to our brain health. But, again, if it's affecting other areas that we talked about, that's where we want to be cautious. So I think we're okay. And by the way, during the holiday times, that advice goes out the window. You're good to go.
Love to hear it.
I'm
All
not a
right.
doctor, by the way, so don't say the doctor told me that.
Yeah, don't quote us on that.
Yeah.
All right. And then, a lot of my friends have been talking about the benefits of cold plunging and using the sauna. Do you have any thoughts on that and how it might impact brain health?
Yeah, so cold plunge, there's been some research on the impacts of the benefits of cold plunge as it pertains to cognitive health. And it doesn't even have to be like that super, super cold. There's some benefits, just like cold swimming or cold exposure can be helpful. But the research on that is a little new in terms of like the long-term effects of cognitive health. But sauna, people have been researching and doing, heat therapy for centuries, for generations, and certainly benefits to that. The benefits, again, under your doctor's supervision, prescription or what they say, but can be very beneficial to cardiovascular health, which actually, as we said before, can be tied directly to brain health. So a lot of good benefits from sauna. Cold plunge, we're still doing some research on.
Okay, good to know. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you like to typically review during this presentation?
Yeah, we put it in here because it does come up. I mentioned the supplements before, and just, again, if anyone's working with a physician, they're recommending supplements, absolutely follow your doctor's orders. But, again, we want to try to do things naturally. I'm sure everyone here has seen the advertisements for like the memory boosting, memory care supplements. We see them all the time. Dr. Mark tells a pretty funny story. He was giving a speech and he had a gentleman come up to him afterwards and was raving about this memory care supplement. Recall so much better, much more in tune with the world around me, just feel much more sharp. Dr. Mark was like, wow, that's wonderful news to hear. Just out of curiosity, what is the name of the supplement you're taking? And the gentleman looked at him kind of blankly and said, you know what? I can't remember right now, so we could take that one for what we will. But I'll just end with this, just as a follow up to folks. So I know we went through a lot of information. We put together a sort of Cliff Notes version of what we talked about today. So Claire will make sure that we make that available for you all to get to the audience. So it's a good, kind of quick reminder of the things we talked about. Dr. Mark's book is called The Age-Proof Brain. If anyone's really interested in this and wants to take a deeper dive, and you can get that anywhere that you find books, it's a pretty easy read. And then, for me, it's just little tweaks here and there. Can I get a little bit better with, exercise, try to incorporate a little bit more learning, try to sleep a little bit better. But I think I'll just go back and end with this quote from Dr. Mark is that, a sharp mind into older age isn't just a bit of luck. It's within reach for most of us. So again, the optimism and the hopefulness that again, we've got a lot more control than previously thought. So with that, I'll just end with a huge thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. We really appreciate it. I think this has been really insightful, and I'm sure our clients and friends have really enjoyed hearing more about brain health. So if anyone has any additional questions, we're always happy to ask Bill offline. But again, thank you for joining the Cooke Financial Group in the BULLpen webinar.